The moment that story began to circulate, it didn't feel like gossip, it felt like a fracture forming at the very center of power. A single accident, dismissed in seconds, was quietly evolving into something far more dangerous. And if even part of it was true, then what we were witnessing wasn't misfortune, it was strategy. Because the official version was almost too clean. A quiet road, a sudden loss of control, a technical fault. Simple, contained, and convenient. That's what the palace offered. But when events inside institutions like this unfold with perfect timing, you have to ask yourself something uncomfortable. Who benefits from the chaos? And more importantly, who needed time? The crash didn't just interrupt a routine day. It froze a moment that was supposed to change everything. Behind closed doors, preparations were already underway for a sensitive transition of authority, one that would gradually shift influence away from the old guard and into new hands. That timing alone was enough to raise questions, but what truly unsettled observers wasn't the accident itself, it was what surrounded it. The silence. No detailed breakdown, no transparent inquiry, just a brief statement and a request for privacy. In ordinary situations, that might pass without resistance. But here, every detail matters, and when details disappear, suspicion fills the void. Now think about this carefully. If a system built on protocol suddenly breaks its own rules, is that an error or a decision? Because one detail stood out immediately. The absence of full security protocol. For someone in that position, traveling without the usual protection wasn't just unusual, it was almost unthinkable. These procedures exist for a reason, and breaking them isn't spontaneous. It requires approval, intent, and awareness of the risks. So the question becomes sharper. Why take that risk on that specific day? And this is where the story begins to shift from coincidence to pattern. Because when you start aligning the timeline, things stop looking random. The inspection of the vehicle, reportedly flawless. The sudden change in travel arrangements. The exact window of the incident, coinciding with a critical internal moment that now had to be postponed. That's not just bad luck. That's precision. And someone inside the system noticed. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly. Watching, analyzing, connecting pieces that didn't belong together. Because when you've grown up inside an institution like this, you don't just see events. You read them. You understand what should happen, what usually happens, and most importantly, what never happens. And this didn't fit. There's a difference between reacting to a crisis and recognizing a pattern. One is emotional. The other is calculated. And once that calculation begins, it becomes very hard to stop. Because now you're no longer asking, what happened? You're asking, what was this meant to delay? Financial discussions were already scheduled. Internal audits were approaching. Access, authority, control, all of it was about to shift. And suddenly, everything paused. Conveniently. But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. If this was intentional, then it wasn't just about avoiding a moment, it was about buying time. Time to move things, to adjust records, to close gaps before anyone else could see them. So let me ask you something directly. If someone needed just 2 weeks to clean something up, and an accident gave them exactly that delay, would you still call it coincidence? Or would you start looking deeper? Because deeper is exactly where this story goes next. Not into public statements or official explanations, but into behavior. Subtle, controlled, and far more revealing than any press release. Because when pressure builds, people don't just react, they reveal who they really are. And what was happening behind those hospital walls didn't look like recovery. It looked like control. Not panic, not fear, but calculation. Conversations that didn't match the situation. Priorities that felt misplaced. And a sense that while the world outside believed one version of events, something entirely different was unfolding behind the scenes. Which leads to a much darker possibility. What if the accident wasn't the crisis? What if it was the cover? And if that's true, then the real story hasn't even begun yet. And once that possibility enters the picture, everything that follows starts to feel heavier, more deliberate, almost inevitable. Because if the accident was the cover, then what happened next wasn't recovery, it was execution. not in the dramatic sense the public imagines, but in the quiet, controlled way power protects itself when it feels threatened. Every movement becomes measured, every interaction carries weight, and every second starts to matter. Behind the palace walls, the atmosphere didn't settle, it tightened. There were no loud confrontations, no visible panic, just a shift in behavior so subtle that most people would miss it entirely. But inside systems like this, silence is never empty. It's active. It means decisions are being made where no one can see them. And someone was watching that silence very carefully. Because patterns were beginning to repeat. The same driver. The same rehearsed explanation. The same unnatural consistency in every statement given. At first glance, it looked disciplined. But look closer, and it felt scripted. Too smooth in some places, too uncertain in others. And that's where cracks begin. Not in what people say, but in how they say it. Think about this. A trained professional placed in a life-threatening situation doesn't forget instinct. They don't freeze in ways that defy years of experience. Yet the version being told didn't match the behavior expected. No evasive maneuver. No attempt to redirect. No split-second correction. Just impact. And when something as basic as human instinct doesn't align with the story, it forces a different kind of question. Was the loss of control real, or was it allowed? Because that distinction changes everything. At the same time, another layer started to surface. One far less visible but far more dangerous. Documentation. Records. Systems that are supposed to reflect truth with precision. And yet, what appeared was perfection. Too perfect. Every entry aligned. Every log clean. Every signature exactly where it should be. On paper, it looked flawless. But real systems, especially complex ones, never look flawless. There are always minor inconsistencies, small human traces, imperfections that prove authenticity. Remove those imperfections, and what you're left with isn't accuracy. It's design. So now the story is no longer about an accident. It's about coordination. Because to align behavior, documentation, and timing at this level requires intent. It requires awareness of how systems work, and more importantly, how to manipulate them without triggering immediate alarm. And here's the part most people overlook. Manipulation isn't chaos. It's discipline. It's knowing exactly how far to go without exposing yourself. But even the most controlled systems leave behind something they can't fully erase. Residual traces. Fragments that don't fit neatly into the narrative. And when those fragments are pulled together, they don't just suggest interference. They point toward it. Not mechanical failure. Not random error. Intervention. And if intervention happened, then it didn't come from outside. It came from within reach. Within proximity. Within trust. Let that sink in for a moment. If control was taken from inside the system, then someone close enough to influence it chose to. Now ask yourself this. Is that still an accident? Or is it something far more calculated? Because once that line is crossed, the situation stops being about safety and starts becoming about motive. And motives inside institutions like this are rarely simple. They're layered. Power, timing, access, and survival all woven together. And just when the situation couldn't feel more controlled, it becomes more unsettling. Because control doesn't end with the event. It continues afterward. The environment where recovery should feel quiet, instead feels active. Not outwardly, not obviously, but beneath the surface. Movements that don't match the moment. Conversations that don't match the condition. Decisions being made when stillness would be expected. Which raises another question you can't ignore. If someone is truly recovering, why are they still managing things? Why are instructions still being passed? Why does the situation feel ongoing? Because that suggests something critical. The accident didn't pause the plan. It protected it. And if that's true, then everything happening now isn't damage control. It's continuation. And the deeper this goes, the clearer one thing becomes. This isn't about a single event anymore. It's about a system being quietly reshaped in real time. while the world is focused on the wrong moment. But here's where the tension truly begins to rise. Because watching is one thing, knowing is another. And once enough pieces fall into place, observation turns into certainty. And certainty forces a decision that can't be undone. Do you expose it and risk tearing everything apart? Or do you stay silent and become part of it? Because the truth, once fully seen, doesn't give you the option to look away. And what was about to be uncovered next wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. And once it becomes proof, everything changes. Because suspicion can be ignored, explained away, buried under protocol and tradition. But proof, real, undeniable proof, does something far more dangerous. It forces action. It removes the comfort of uncertainty and replaces it with a single, unavoidable reality. Someone inside the system wasn't just bending the rules. They were rewriting them. And the moment that realization settled in, the situation stopped being an internal concern and started becoming a crisis of integrity. Not just for individuals, but for the institution itself. Because if the foundation is compromised from within, then no amount of public image can hold it together. But here's the turning point most people don't see. Proof doesn't arrive all at once. It builds. Quietly, piece by piece, until one final element connects everything. And suddenly, the entire structure of lies collapses under its own weight. That final element wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. Fragments of data that had been altered, but not completely erased. A timeline that had been adjusted, but not perfectly aligned. Small inconsistencies that, on their own, meant nothing, but together, formed something impossible to deny. Interference. Not accidental. Not external. Deliberate. And here's where the weight of the situation becomes almost unbearable. Because proving something like that doesn't just expose an event, it exposes intent. And intent carries consequences. Now think about the position this creates. You're no longer dealing with doubt. You're holding something that can dismantle trust at the highest level. Something that, if revealed, won't just affect one person, it will ripple through everything connected to them. So the real question isn't, is it true? The real question is, what do you do with it? Because there are only two paths from here. Reveal it, and risk destabilizing everything. Or bury it, and allow the damage to continue, hidden, growing, spreading. And this is where the psychological pressure intensifies. Because the closer you get to truth, the more isolated you become. Decisions can't be shared widely. Trust becomes limited. Every move has to be calculated, because one mistake doesn't just cost reputation, it costs control. And control at this level is everything. But while that internal conflict builds, something else is happening at the same time. Behavior is changing. Not publicly, not in ways that headlines would catch, but in patterns, in urgency, in subtle shifts that reveal far more than words ever could. Because when someone knows they're running out of time, they don't slow down. They accelerate. Movements become sharper. Communication becomes tighter. Priorities narrow to one objective: containment. Not recovery. Containment. And that distinction matters. Because containment means there's something to hide. Instructions start flowing more frequently. Not broad, not obvious, but targeted. Specific actions, directed towards specific outcomes. The kind of behavior you only see when someone is trying to close gaps before they're discovered. And if you step back and look at it clearly, it doesn't look like someone protecting themselves from an accident. It looks like someone protecting a plan from exposure. Now ask yourself this. If everything was truly under control, why the urgency? Why the need to act quickly, quietly, and precisely? Why does it feel like time is being chased instead of managed? Because that's the biggest tell of all. When someone is ahead, they move carefully. When someone is about to be exposed, they rush. And that rush creates mistakes. Small ones at first, almost invisible, but enough to confirm what the evidence is already suggesting, that the situation is no longer stable. That control is slipping. That whatever was carefully constructed is beginning to fracture. And once cracks appear, they spread. Which brings us to the most dangerous moment in this entire sequence. The point where knowing is no longer enough. Because once you see the full picture, once every piece aligns and every doubt disappears, you reach a threshold that cannot be reversed. You either act, or you accept. And accepting means something very specific here. It means allowing the system to be quietly reshaped by someone operating in the shadows, using manipulation instead of transparency, control instead of accountability. But acting triggers something far more explosive. Because exposing truth at this level doesn't happen in isolation. It creates confrontation. Direct. Unavoidable. Final. And here's the part that changes everything. This is no longer about uncovering what happened. This is about confronting the person behind it. And once that confrontation begins, there is no version of this story where things go back to normal. Because truth doesn't just reveal, it destroys illusions. So the real question now becomes unavoidable. When the moment comes, when everything is laid out, undeniable and complete, will the response be denial or defiance? Because what happens next won't just decide the outcome of this situation. It will define the future of everything built around it. And when that moment finally arrived, it didn't explode the way most people would expect. It didn't unfold in public. It didn't leak to the press. It happened in silence, controlled, contained, and far more devastating because of it. Because when truth reaches that level, it doesn't need noise to destroy something. It just needs to be seen by the right people. The room itself carried a kind of weight that couldn't be ignored. Not tension in the usual sense, but something heavier, finality. The kind that settles in when everyone present already knows that whatever happens next cannot be undone. There were no speeches, no dramatic accusations, just evidence, laid out piece by piece, not rushed, not forced, just presented with a precision that made denial almost impossible. Because when proof is structured correctly, it doesn't argue, it reveals. And here's the detail that changes everything. The reaction wasn't immediate. There was a pause. A long, suffocating silence where the reality of what was being shown had to settle in. Because understanding something like this isn't instant. It's gradual. It moves from confusion to disbelief, and then finally, to recognition. And recognition is the moment everything breaks. Because once you recognize the truth, you can't reshape it into something more comfortable. You can't explain it away. You can't hide behind assumptions. You either accept it, or you fight it. Now here's where the situation becomes even more intense. The response wasn't panic. It wasn't emotional collapse. It was something far more unsettling. Composure. A controlled, deliberate composure that didn't match the gravity of what had just been revealed. Because instead of denial, what surfaced was something closer to justification. Not loud, not defensive, but calculated. Almost as if the exposure wasn't unexpected, just inconvenient. Let that sink in. Because when someone responds to undeniable proof with calm defiance instead of shock, it tells you something critical. They believed they wouldn't be caught. Or worse, they believed even if they were caught, they could still control the outcome. And that's where the real fracture begins. Because now the situation isn't just about what was done, it's about mindset. About how far someone is willing to go to maintain influence, even when everything has already been exposed. And this is the moment where the emotional weight shifts completely. Because up until now, this was a question of truth. Now, it becomes a question of consequence. What happens when the truth is no longer hidden? What happens when the illusion can't be maintained? What happens when power meets accountability, with no room left to maneuver? And here's the part that hits hardest. The decision that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't announced with authority or framed for the public. It was quiet, cold, final. Because in systems like this, the most powerful actions are rarely the most visible ones. They happen behind closed doors, where outcomes are decided long before explanations are given. Access begins to disappear. Influence starts to shrink. Control is removed, piece by piece, until what once felt untouchable becomes isolated. Not publicly destroyed, but internally dismantled. And if you think about it carefully, that's far more effective. Because public conflict creates sympathy. Silence creates distance. And distance, over time, erases power. But here's where the emotional impact deepens even further. Because this wasn't just a structural decision. It was personal. Deeply personal. Trust wasn't just broken, it was redefined. Relationships that once held emotional weight were now reduced to calculated distance. And the hardest part of all, there was no way back. Because some lines, once crossed, don't allow repair. They only allow separation. And in that moment, what collapsed wasn't just a plan. It was a bond, a belief, a version of reality that had been held together for far longer than it should have been. Now ask yourself this. What's more devastating, losing power, or realizing the person you trusted was never who you believed they were? Because that realization doesn't just affect decisions. It changes perception forever. And once perception changes, everything that follows becomes clearer and colder. But even after all of this, the story doesn't end here. Because consequences inside closed systems don't stay contained forever. They ripple. Slowly at first, then all at once. And what happens next won't just determine how this situation is remembered. It will determine how the future is controlled. Because when something like this is exposed at the highest level, the system doesn't just recover. It transforms. And when a system like that transforms, it doesn't announce the change. It absorbs it. On the surface, everything begins to look normal again. Appearances are restored, routines return, and the public sees only what it has always seen: stability, continuity, control. But underneath that calm surface, something fundamental has shifted. Something that can never fully return to what it was. Because once truth has passed through the core of power, it leaves a permanent mark. Not visible, but undeniable. Decisions start to feel different. Not louder, not harsher, but sharper. More precise. Less tolerant of uncertainty. Because when trust has already been broken once, the system adapts by removing the space where it could happen again. And that adaptation comes at a cost. Distance. Emotional distance. Strategic distance. A quiet separation between roles that once overlapped. Where there was once assumption, now there is verification. Where there was once comfort, now there is control. And here's the part most people never see. The rebuilding doesn't happen through grand gestures. It happens through quiet discipline. Every document reviewed more carefully. Every decision filtered through a new lens. Every movement measured, not just for outcome, but for intent. Because the lesson has already been learned, and it won't be ignored a second time. But while the system stabilizes, the individuals inside it carry something much heavier. Because exposure doesn't just end a conflict. It leaves behind clarity. A clarity that is often far more difficult to live with than uncertainty ever was. Think about that for a moment. Uncertainty allows hope. Clarity removes it. And when you see someone exactly as they are, without illusion, without assumption, there's no way to return to what existed before. No way to rebuild that same version of trust. Only a new version. Colder, more aware, and far less forgiving. And this is where the emotional weight of the story truly settles in. Because what was lost here wasn't just influence or control. It was belief. The belief that loyalty would hold. The belief that power would be handled with restraint. The belief that the system, at its highest level, was still anchored in something unbreakable. And once that belief is shaken, everything that follows becomes intentional. Not reactive. Intentional. The future isn't approached with assumption anymore. It's constructed. Carefully. Methodically. With an awareness that every decision now carries not just consequence, but memory. And memory changes leadership. Because leadership shaped by experience is very different from leadership shaped by expectation. It becomes less trusting, more observant, more willing to act early rather than explain later. Now let me ask you something that really defines everything you've just seen unfold. What matters more in the end? Protecting the image of stability, or protecting the truth that sustains it? Because those two things don't always align. And in moments like this, choosing one means sacrificing the other. But here's the final shift. The silence that follows is no longer uncertainty. It's control. Not the kind that hides things, but the kind that ensures they don't happen again. A system recalibrated, a structure reinforced, and a future shaped by a lesson that came at a very real cost. And as everything settles back into place, one truth remains quietly at the center of it all. Power doesn't just reveal who people are. It reveals who they were willing to become. So now I want you to think about this carefully. When everything was on the line, when time, control, and exposure collided, who do you believe truly defined this story? The one who tried to hold on to power at any cost? The one who chose to expose the truth despite the consequences? Or the one who had to live with the aftermath of both? Because your answer to that question doesn't just define the story. It defines how you understand power itself. If this kind of deep, inside perspective is something you want more of, stories that don't just tell you what happened, but make you question why it happened, then make sure you stay connected. There's always another layer. And the next one might be even more revealing.